It all started with a creek, a little stream I thought was harmless, quiet, mine. But when a power-hungry HOA president and his wife tried to drain it, frame me, and take over our land in the name of safety, they had no idea who they were dealing with. I'm not just some old man in a rocking chair. I'm the last person you want to push when you're hiding secrets beneath your lawn. What followed was a storm, real and political. And by the end of it, their empire was underwater, literally. This is a story about land, lies, and standing your ground when no one else will. Let us know where you're tuning in from and what time you're listening. Drop it in the comments. We'd love to hear from you. My name's Walter Granger. I'm 68 years old, a retired forest ranger, and I've lived in this cabin at the edge of Sycamore Hollow, North Carolina, for more than 3 decades. Built it with my own hands, pine logs, river stone, sweat, and a whole lot of stubborn. Some folks call it rustic, others call it old-fashioned. I just call it home. When my wife Evelyn passed 4 years ago, this place became more than just a house. It became my anchor. We were married 42 years, raised 2 daughters, buried 1 dog, and planted enough flowers around the porch to keep butterflies busy all summer. After she died, I kept her favorite blue rocking chair on the porch. Sometimes, when the wind kicks up just right, it creaks a little, like she's still rocking beside me. Maybe that's just my heart wishing. But I like the sound. Behind the cabin, there's a narrow stretch of water that's been flowing longer than I've been alive. Clear Fork Run. That's the name I gave it, though it probably had one long before I showed up. It's fed by a spring somewhere up the ridge, trickles down past my property, and eventually disappears into the woods like a secret. The water's clean and cold. You can see clear to the bottom pebbles, moss, the occasional crayfish skittering sideways like it's late for something. Every morning, I take my coffee out back and sit on the old stump by the creek. That's my sanctuary. The sun cuts through the trees, dances on the water, and the mist rises like prayers you didn't even know you needed to say. Evelyn used to call it God's jewelry box. The way the light sparkled across the surface. I didn't get it at first, but now I do. That little stream has seen me through some long nights. After the funeral, when everything felt too quiet, I'd sit out there in the dark and just listen. No need to speak, no need to explain. The water always understood. Grief doesn't leave you, it just changes shape. And somehow, that creek helped me shape mine into something I could carry. I keep it tended like a man tends his soul. I clear the brush, remove fallen limbs, shore up the banks with native grasses. I know water. I spent 40 years in the woods, watching rivers carve valleys, seeing flash floods reshape entire hillsides. A stream like mine? It's alive. You don't control it. You respect it. Kids in the neighborhood stop by sometimes. Not many left, but the ones who are still here know they're welcome. Caleb and Maggie, siblings from 2 doors down, like to hunt for frogs or salamanders under the flat stones. I teach them not to disturb the eggs, how to gently turn the rocks and put them back the way they found them. It's not just playtime, it's stewardship. And their parents? They trust me. Most of the folks around here do. I've patched their fences, pulled their trucks out of ditches, and fixed more than 1 busted well pump without ever asking for anything in return. See, Sycamore Hollow used to be the kind of place where a handshake meant something, where folks respected the land because they needed it, and they knew it could bite back. I remember when we'd all gather at the Grange Hall in the fall, bring pies and pickled okra, vote on whether to fix the gravel road or leave it muddy another winter. Nobody needed a board or a council. We just took care of each other. But that's been changing, little by little. It started with the big trucks rumbling up the ridge, hauling in stone veneer and prefab roofing. Then came the gates, fancy name signs, lawn service trucks, and leaf blowers every Saturday like clockwork. New folks, out-of-towners, city money. They build their mansions with wraparound porches, And don't sit on a 1OFEM. They've got ideas. Ideas about what's safe and clean and organized. Last week, I saw a metal plaque near the top of the hill. Welcome to Sycamore Hollow Hills, a covenant community. I snorted and kept driving. Sounded like something out of a sales brochure. I figured it didn't have much to do with me. Turns out, I was wrong. See, that creek behind my house? That whispering ribbon of peace that carried me through the worst season of my life? That living, breathing thing that's more friend than feature? It's about to become the battleground of a war I never asked to fight. 3 days after I saw that Covenant Community sign go up at the top of the ridge, a thick envelope showed up in my mailbox. Cream-colored, embossed letters. It looked more like a wedding invitation than a warning. But the moment I opened it, I knew it was neither. It was the beginning of something much worse. Inside was a formal welcome to the Sycamore Hollow Hills Homeowners Association letter, complete with a glossy brochure and enough legal jargon to choke a horse. According to the packet, my property, along with a dozen others along the lower end of the valley, had been incorporated into the HOA jurisdiction. I blinked at that word. Incorporated? Incorporated into what? Nobody had knocked on my door. Nobody even had the decency to ask. The brochure laid it all out in cheerful corporate fonts. Monthly dues of $95, architectural conformity guidelines, lawn maintenance standards, restrictions on fence height, limits on holiday decorations, and something called a Community Unity Color Palette for exterior paint. I laughed out loud at that one. My place was stained with linseed oil and smoke. No palette on earth could change that. At the bottom of the last page was a signature line, highlighted in yellow, with a sentence underneath printed in bold. Failure to sign and return within 30 days will be considered legal acceptance of HOA terms. I set the letter down next to my half-finished crossword and muttered something Evelyn wouldn't have approved of. I wasn't about to sign that nonsense. I'd been here longer than most of the pavement in this valley. No HOA had any business telling me what mailbox I could use or how many inches of grass I was allowed to have. I figured that'd be the end of it, just a misunderstanding. I was wrong. The very next morning, around 10 a.m., I was out back, transplanting some bee balm along the creek bed, when I heard the sound of tires crunching gravel. Not just any tires, slow, deliberate SUV tires. I stood, brushed the dirt off my jeans, and watched as a white Lexus with dealer plates pulled into my drive. Out stepped a man and a woman, dressed like they were about to host a fundraiser for a politician I'd never vote for. He had silver hair, expensive sunglasses, and the posture of a man used to ordering people around. She wore a pastel sweater draped around her shoulders and carried a leather-bound portfolio. "Good morning," she called, walking toward me with a politician's smile. "I'm Trudy Bellamy, and this is my husband, Raymond. We're with the HOA." She extended the folder like it was a gift basket. I didn't take it. "I assume you received the welcome letter," she said, voice as sweet as syrup, but twice as sticky. "We noticed you haven't returned the signed agreement." "That's because I haven't agreed to anything," I replied. Steady. Raymond cleared his throat. He didn't take off his sunglasses. "Mr. Granger, your property deed contains a clause allowing for HOA formation if 75% of homeowners in the district approve. We've reached that threshold." I stared at them. "I built this place before you folks ever heard of Sycamore Hollow. My deed doesn't say anything about joining a private club." Trudy flipped open the folder and pointed to a highlighted section. "It's standard language in most rural deeds from the 80s. Never enforced until now. We're just bringing the whole area under a unified set of community standards." "Standards?" I said. "Who decided what those are?" "We did," Raymond said plainly. That stopped me cold. He wasn't even trying to hide it. She smiled wider. "It really is for the best. It helps preserve property values." I felt my jaw tighten. "Lady, I'm not selling." "Well, be that as it may," she went on, "we do need to talk about the stream in your backyard. I tilted my head. What about it? Unfenced water features are prohibited, she said. Like that should make perfect sense to anyone with a brain. It's a danger to children, liability risks and all that. It's not a feature, I said. It's a creek, a natural one. Been here before you, before me, probably before the damn Civil War. Natural or not, it falls under the jurisdiction of the HOA now, Raymond added. You'll need to either drain it or install an approved safety barrier within 30 days. I didn't say another word. I just turned, walked into my shed, and shut the door behind me. Let them figure out what that meant. That evening, I made some calls. Ernie from up the road, Vietnam vet, owns a big dog and an American flag that's never touched the ground. Miss Lila, widow, bakes the best blackberry cobbler you'll ever eat. They'd gotten the same letter, same threats, same visit. So we gathered on my porch that night. The bourbon came out and so did the flashlights and reading glasses. We read every page of that packet together, line by line. And with every clause and fine print, our concern turned into something else. These people weren't just making rules. They were building a kingdom, and we were the peasants. Raymond had a background in real estate law. Trudy had run a private school and chaired 2 nonprofits in Atlanta. This wasn't their first rodeo. We don't stop this now, Ernie said, eyes hard. They're going to own this hollow. And he was right, because it wasn't just about a creek anymore. It was about the soul of Sycamore Hollow. The next time I saw the Bellamys, it wasn't through a letter or a Lexus. It was right on my front porch. It was a Friday afternoon, just before supper. I'd been inside seasoning a cast iron skillet to make cornbread, something Evelyn always said should be crisp on the outside and soft in the middle, when I heard a knock. 3 short raps, sharp and rehearsed, like someone practiced it beforehand. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and opened the door. There they were, Trudy and Raymond Bellamy, standing side by side like a catalog spread for modern Southern living. Trudy had on a baby blue cardigan draped neatly over her shoulders, white slacks, and enough pearls to make the governor's wife jealous. Raymond stood behind her in his ever-present sunglasses and loafers that had never touched red clay in their life. He held a clipboard. She held that same pasted-on smile that never quite made it to her eyes. "Good evening, Mr. Granger," Trudy chirped. "We just wanted to stop by and check in, make sure you didn't have any questions about your HOA transition." I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. No questions. Still not interested. Raymond stepped forward. "We noticed the creek is still flowing behind your property. The 30-day window for remediation is now down to 23 days. You've been counting?" I asked. "We're obligated to ensure compliance with community safety standards," he replied, sounding like someone reading from a laminated pamphlet. Trudy tried again, voice lighter than air. "You know, Walter, may I call you Walter? We completely understand that this is a big change, but we believe in dialogue, in finding solutions. For instance, have you considered filling in the stream with decorative river rock? There's a landscaping firm we work with that offers very tasteful options, almost indistinguishable from a real creek." "It is a real creek," I snapped. "It's not some plastic water feature from a shopping center courtyard. It's been running through this land since before your HOA existed, and probably before your grandparents were born." Raymond cleared his throat like I'd said something inappropriate. "Be that as it may, it now falls under the jurisdiction of the HOA, and all water hazards must be either fenced or eliminated." "You want me to put a fence around a living stream?" I said. "What's next? Lifeguards posted on puddles?" Neither of them laughed. Trudy's smile twitched just enough to show the edge underneath. "We're only trying to keep the community safe. We'd hate to see anyone fined unnecessarily." There it was, the velvet-gloved threat. The kind of threat that sounds polite, but settles into your gut like a rock. I'd seen it in courtrooms and ranger stations, always from people with just enough authority to make your life miserable if you pushed back. "Thanks for stopping by," I said, starting to close the door. Raymond's foot came forward, resting lightly against the threshold. Not hard, just enough to stop the door. A silent statement. "I'd think twice about resisting this," he said, his voice dropping to something quieter. "The HOA has enforcement rights, liens, legal remedies. This isn't just about water, Walter. It's about cooperation." I stared at him, then at the reflection of my own face in his damn sunglasses, distorted, small, framed in expensive plastic. "You threatening me, Raymond?" I asked. He stepped back just half a pace, but it was enough. He offered a thin-lipped smile. "Just informing you." They turned and walked off my porch, like they hadn't just tried to muscle their way into my land and my life. I stood there a while, jaw tight, heart thudding, staring at the spot where his foot had blocked my door. You learn a lot about a man by how he behaves at your threshold. Later that night, after the sun dipped behind the trees and the frogs began to croak, I wandered down to the creek. The air was thick with summer-damp earth, honeysuckle, and the distant whine of cicadas. I crouched by the water and dipped my fingers in. Cold, clear, steady. It moved with purpose, like it had somewhere to be, like it had a job to do. That creek had seen me through loss, through change, through the quiet years after Evelyn died, when it was the only sound I could stand. They wanted to call it a hazard, a nuisance, a liability, but they didn't know it. They hadn't sat beside it and listened when the world went quiet. I walked back to the cabin and went straight to my filing cabinet. Pulled out the manila envelope labeled Deed and Survey. Been a while since I looked at it. The paper was yellowed, a little curled at the edges, but the ink still held. There, plain as day, was the survey from 1986, noting a natural watercourse originating from the northeastern spring and flowing west across my property. A named, recognized, documented creek. I scanned it, photocopied it 3 times, took pictures with my phone. Then I sat down at the kitchen table and started writing. First, a letter to the HOA, formal, measured, referencing the deed, citing the waterway designation. Then one to the County Water Authority, including images of the map and coordinates. Then another to the Department of Environmental Quality, because if they wanted to bury this creek, they'd have to bury the law with it. They wanted to play games with paper, I'd play. And I'd play to win. The next morning, I took all 3 letters to the post office. Paid extra for certified mail. Return receipt requested. If they were going to try and choke the life out of Sycamore Hollow with rules and regulations, then maybe it was time someone reminded them rules cut both ways. The certified letters must have rattled their cage more than I expected, because less than a week later, I got hit with my first official HOA violation notice. It came in a heavy envelope, sealed with a gold sticker like it was some kind of award. It smelled faintly of expensive perfume and arrogance. Inside was a glossy tri-fold sheet with my name printed in bold across the top, followed by a photograph, an actual color photo of my backyard. My creek, to be exact. Someone had taken it from the tree line near the back fence. The caption underneath read, "Unfenced water hazard. Immediate remediation required." And beneath that, a $500 fine. I stared at the paper for a long minute, pulse quickening. They'd trespassed onto my property to snap a photo without permission. Photographed my land like I was some sort of threat. They didn't bother to knock, didn't bother to ask. Just treated my home like evidence at a crime scene. And they called it community safety. I wasn't the only one. By noon, Ernie texted me a picture of his own violation, $250 for having an unapproved flagpole height and a second warning for decorative lawn statuary not in compliance. Miss Lila got dinged for her flower boxes being non-uniform in color, which made her laugh so hard. She nearly choked on her sweet tea. "They're geraniums, Walter," she said, "not crime scenes." It wasn't enforcement. It was a blitz, a full-on bureaucratic ambush. They were going after the elders first, the ones who'd lived here the longest, the ones who hadn't bent the knee. It was a message, comply or pay. That Thursday night, They held their first mandatory HOA community meeting. The venue? The banquet room inside the new model, home up the hill. I showed up 10 minutes early, still in my work boots and an old ranger jacket. I had dirt under my nails and a scowl on my face. The model house smelled like lavender and lemon oil, too clean to feel real. They had cubes of sharp cheddar on toothpicks, little cookies shaped like houses, and chilled bottled water lined up in rows. There was even soft music playing, like we were at a real estate seminar. The room filled quickly. Most were new folks from up on the ridge, Raymond and Trudy's people, the kind who wore pressed khakis and said, "Bless your heart," while calling code enforcement on you. But a few of us older Valley residents were there too. We stayed toward the back, quiet, watchful. Raymond stepped up like he was running for office. Tan, tall, and insufferably pleased with himself. Trudy stood off to the side, fingers on a slideshow remote, eyes scanning the room like a hawk. On the big screen behind them, a title card appeared, "Building a Safer, Unified Community." He started talking about property values, safety concerns, uniformity, words like cohesion, curb appeal, and legacy planning. Then came the slides charts, pie graphs, even photos. And there it was, my creek, in full color, zoomed in to make it look wild and threatening. The image was grainy, but clearly taken from my land. "Unsecured bodies of water pose a drowning risk," Raymond said, gesturing toward the screen like he was unveiling a public health crisis, "especially to young children. We cannot, in good conscience, allow this hazard to remain." I stood up, my voice cut through the murmurs. "That's a natural creek, been flowing through that land for longer than this whole development has existed. It's not a hazard, it's a part of the ecosystem." Trudy didn't miss a beat. She clicked to the next slide. "The bylaws are clear. All water features, natural or otherwise, must be fenced or drained if they pose a safety concern." A woman near the front raised her hand. "Who decides what's a concern?" "The HOA board," Trudy replied smoothly, "in consultation with community standards." "And who is the board?" I asked. Raymond straightened. "Currently, myself, Trudy, and Mr. Calhoun from Lot 3C. I shook my head. "That's 3 people making decisions for dozens of homes. That's not a board, that's a private club." A ripple moved through the room. Someone coughed. A few folks exchanged glances. "We were voted in," Trudy added quickly. "By who?" I asked. "The same 10 people you invited to that wine and cheese brunch last spring?" They didn't answer. But they didn't have to. The silence did the talking. After the meeting, as people trickled out into the parking lot, I noticed a few new faces hanging back. A young couple from the west edge of the hollow stopped me. He looked embarrassed. She looked mad. "They fined us for our swing set," she said. Said the wood was visually inconsistent with the architectural tone. "That set's been there since before our daughter was born." An older man joined in. "They told me my bird feeder was a squirrel risk. Made me take it down." Another woman, quiet and nervous, said she got cited for a wind chime that was apparently too loud. "Exceeded ambient noise standards," she whispered. "It wasn't just me." They were spreading their control like kudzu, slow, choking, and hard to kill. And people were starting to notice, starting to feel cornered, but they didn't know what to do about it. I knew. I could see it in their eyes. They were waiting for someone to take the first swing. And I had just the creek for the job. It started with a hunch. I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Not just about the fines or the creek, but the way the Bellamys kept circling the issue, like vultures waiting for something to die. They wanted that water gone, not managed, not adjusted, gone, and I couldn't figure out why. So I did what I've always done when something doesn't sit right. I put on my boots and started walking. The creek behind my cabin flows east to west. It starts somewhere up the ridge, near the newest section of the development where Raymond and Trudy's fancy house sits like a throne on a hill. I'd never paid much attention to that stretch of land before. It used to be forest, full of deer and foxes, until the bulldozers came in 5 years ago and flattened it to make room for tennis courts, manicured walking trails, and homes with garages bigger than my entire cabin. I started my walk early, before the sun had burned off the morning fog. The air still held a cool dampness, and the earth smelled like wet leaves and pine bark. I followed the line of the creek upstream, staying just inside the tree line, far enough from the neatly cut grass that no one would see me unless they were actively looking. It was quiet, eerily so. No birdsong, no insects humming, just the sound of my boots on the soft ground and the trickle of water. The farther up I went, the stranger it felt. The creek, which always babbled clearly behind my home, seemed to change character the farther I moved toward its source. The water darkened. It slowed. And the smell. It was faint at first, but I know that scent. Chemicals. Something synthetic and wrong. About 200 yards behind the Bellamy's estate, hidden behind a thick screen of hedges and decorative holly, I found what I hadn't known I was looking for. A square concrete basin, sunken into the ground and mostly concealed. At a glance, you'd think it was a dry pond or some sort of landscape feature. But I'd seen enough retention systems in my career to know exactly what I was looking at. And feeding into that basin? A wide, black, corrugated pipe running down from the Bellamy's property line. I followed it with my eyes, then with my feet. It sloped downward, weaving between trees and shrubs like a dark vein, until it disappeared beneath a culvert and fed directly into my creek. That's when my stomach dropped. I knelt at the edge of the basin and reached out. The water was oily to the touch, sluggish and discolored. Bits of clumped fertilizer floated on the surface. And beneath that fish, small ones, dead, floating belly up like leaves in a gutter. I took photos, dozens, the basin, the pipe, the water, close-ups of the sheen, wide shots that showed the proximity to their property. I even spotted a county drainage marker tucked halfway behind a mossy rock and took a picture of that too. Then I backtracked and followed the pipe the other way, toward the source. It ran right up to the Bellamy's backyard, just behind their pristine patio with the gas fire pit and concrete lion statues. From where I crouched, I could see their sprinkler system ticking softly, watering the over-fertilized lawn. They were using my land as their drainage ditch. That's why they wanted the creek gone. Not because it was unsafe, but because if anyone ever traced that polluted water, it would lead straight back to their little palace on the hill. And they wanted the evidence erased. As I crouched in the underbrush, trying to settle my racing thoughts, I heard the low rumble of a motor. I ducked behind a wide cedar and held my breath. A golf cart came rolling down the gravel maintenance path. Raymond was driving. He pulled up beside the basin, stepped off without closing the door, and glanced around like he was checking for witnesses. Then he pulled a blue jug out from the back of the cart, something plastic, with a warning label. I couldn't make out and unscrewed the cap. He poured the liquid straight into the water. It clouded instantly. Within seconds, more fish surfaced. The smell hit me like a slap chemical, sharp, unnatural. Raymond stood there watching for a few moments, then screwed the lid back on, loaded the container into the cart, and drove off. I didn't move until the sound faded completely. Then I stepped out and approached the basin again. The water now had a pale film across the surface. A few frogs were still floating, legs limp. I pulled out my phone and recorded a video, panned from the pipe to the dead fish, narrated the situation in a low, steady voice. I didn't dramatize it. I didn't need to. That night I invited Ernie and Miss Lila to my place. I showed them the pictures, the video. Ernie slammed his hand on the table hard enough to rattle the mason jar. I was drinking from... I knew those people were dirty, he muttered. But this is criminal. Miss Lila just sat there quiet for a while, her hands in her lap, staring at the screen. They're not just trying to shut you up, she said finally. They're trying to frame you, make it look like your creek is the source of all this. I nodded slowly. They picked the wrong old man. I spent the next 2 hours compiling everything. I wrote up a statement and attached the deed to my land, the survey maps from 1986, the video, and a packet of photos showing the flow of water from their backyard to my creek. Then I sent it all to the county water board, to the Department of Environmental Quality, and to the local news tip line. I hit send and sat back in my chair. The Bellamys wanted to fight this with paperwork. Well, so could I. Only difference was I had the truth on my side and that creek to back me up. I didn't hear anything for a few days. Not from the county, not from the Department of Environmental Quality, and not from the HOA. It was the kind of silence that makes your skin itch, like everyone suddenly decided to check their watches at the same time and pretend they didn't see a damn thing. Then, on the 5th day, I got a reply, but not the one I'd hoped for. It was a form letter from the County Water Board, thanking me for my concern, letting me know my complaint had been received and would be reviewed pending available resources and staffing. No timeline, no investigator's name, no case number. Just a digital shrug from a clerk buried under budget cuts. I forwarded the email to Ernie and Miss Lila. Ernie replied with a single word, "Figures." Lila just sent a sad face emoji, which somehow made it feel even worse. I sat out on the porch for a long time that evening, nursing a cup of lukewarm coffee and staring at the creek. It flowed steady as always, unbothered by bureaucracy. There's a lesson in that. Water doesn't wait for permission. It just moves, finds a way. Maybe I needed to do the same. The next morning, I headed into town. First stop was the library, where I used their printer to make a few more copies of the photos and maps I'd gathered. Second stop, the county records office. The clerk behind the counter looked like she was 2 weeks from retirement, or 2 weeks from quitting hard, to say which. When I asked if there were any recent permits pulled for stormwater runoff or drainage changes near Sycamore Hollow, she gave me a long, skeptical look. "You with the developer?" she asked. "No, ma'am. Just a concerned property owner, trying to figure out why my backyard smells like pesticide and fish rot." She raised an eyebrow and disappeared into a back room. 15 minutes later, she returned with a slim manila folder and a wary tone. "Only permit we've got on file is from 2018, she said. "Grading and runoff modification, filed by a Raymond Bellamy." There it was. I asked if I could see the full document. She laid it out on the counter, 4 pages, small font, red stamps all over. I skimmed for anything useful. One line stopped me cold. Rerouted drainage must utilize natural grade and must not discharge into private property without documented easement. I snapped a photo. "Is there a record of any easement filed for 247 Sycamore Run?" I asked. She tapped at her keyboard, then shook her head. "No easement on file. Not for that address or the adjacent parcels." Bingo. "Mind printing that screen for me?" I asked. She did. I thanked her, tucked the papers into my folder, and left with something I hadn't felt in a while: momentum. That evening, just before sunset, I got a knock at the door. When I opened it, I was surprised to see Jenna Holloway, Caleb's mom. I hadn't seen her in months, not since the holiday bake sale at the fire station. She looked tired. Her hair was pulled back in a frizzy bun, and there were lines in her face that hadn't been there last winter. "Hey, Walter," she said, arms crossed. "You got a minute?" "Always," I replied, stepping aside. She didn't come in, just stood on the porch and looked out at the creek. "Caleb told me you were fighting the HOA," she said quietly. "Said you weren't letting them drain the stream." "That's right." She chewed her lip. "They're coming after us now. Said Caleb's treehouse violates the view consistency clause. Said the sightline from the street is aesthetic clutter. It's a treehouse, Walter. The boy built it himself with his grandfather, painted it with leftover barn red. That treehouse is his whole world." I shook my head. "They're not stopping. Not until they control every inch of dirt we stand on." Jenna sighed. "My husband wants to pay the fine. Just move on. But Caleb," he cried when he heard, "told me, why do they get to take everything? She blinked fast, but I saw the tears forming. I didn't have an answer. I nodded slowly. Then I told her everything: the pipe behind the Bellamy's house, the illegal discharge, the dead fish, the forged silence from the county. I showed her the photos, the footage, the manila folder from the records office. Jenna stared at the images for a long time, hands shaking slightly as she scrolled through my phone. "You think that stuff is getting into the soil?" "I know it is." She looked back toward her own house, toward her son's room. "We planted vegetables this year, tomatoes, lettuce. Caleb's been picking them and eating them straight off the vine." My stomach dropped. I hadn't thought about that. She looked back at me, her face different now. No longer just the tired mother trying to stay off the HOA radar. Now she was angry, focused. "You need help?" she asked. I nodded. "Yeah, I do. I'll make calls," she said. "My sister works at Channel 12. She's always looking for a human interest story with a bite. And I've got friends in the PTA who've been fuming ever since Trudy made them remove their handmade benches from the community park." We shook hands. She turned to leave, then paused. "Walter? Yeah? Thanks for standing up. You're giving people hope." After she left, I stood in the dark for a long time. The frogs were singing. The water kept flowing. The HOA had tried to isolate me, make me look like a cranky old man standing in the way of progress. But they'd miscalculated, because now I wasn't the only one standing. 3 days later, the contractors showed up. It was early, too early, for any decent person to be making noise, but there they were, pulling up in a convoy of white pickups, trailers loaded with PVC pipe trenchers, and enough orange survey flags to mark a small runway. I stood at my kitchen window in silence, hands wrapped around a mug of black coffee, watching them fan out across my yard like soldiers on assignment. They didn't knock, didn't call, didn't even hesitate, just stepped off their trucks and started walking my land like it belonged to them. By 8:00 a.m., they were staking flags along both sides of the creek bed. At 8:15, the first backhoe arrived. Trudy, no, let's be honest. Karen showed up 10 minutes later. Same pastel sweater over her shoulders like a cape, clipboard in hand, lips pressed into that smug smile she used when she thought she was winning. She stepped out of her SUV and barely glanced at me before striding over to the crew boss and pointing like she was directing a photo shoot. I didn't bother changing out of my flannel, just slipped on my boots, grabbed my phone, and walked out to meet them. "Morning," I said flatly, coming up behind the crew boss. He was a round man, maybe in his early 50s, with a gut like a beer barrel and a neon safety vest that barely zipped. He turned when he heard my voice and offered a hesitant nod. "You, Mr. Granger?" "I am." He handed me a clipboard with papers clipped to it. "We're here under HOA directive. Stream diversion and pipe burial. Got the work order right here. I didn't take it." "You got a court order?" He blinked. "What? You're standing on private property. You plan on digging, redirecting water, or burying anything on my land, you better have a court order. Otherwise, you're trespassing." That got his attention. Karen stepped in then, voice firm and rehearsed. "Walter, we've given you ample notice. This is a scheduled remediation under HOA Community Ordinance 6.3. The board approved it unanimously. HOA ordinance doesn't override state water laws or private land rights," I said. "Especially when you've been dumping runoff from your illegal drainage system into my property." She flinched. Just a flicker, but I saw it. "I've contacted the county," I continued, "and the news. You dig one shovel of dirt out here, and you'll be doing it on camera." I pulled out my phone and started recording. "Let's document everything, shall we?" Karen opened her mouth to respond, but one of the younger workers behind the backhoe had already raised his own phone and was filming too. She looked at him, and for just a split second, the polite facade cracked. Her eyes narrowed, mouth tightened, and I saw what was really behind that syrupy smile: control and the fear of losing it. She turned sharply and marched back toward her SUV without another word. The crew boss sighed, scratched the back of his neck. "Look, man, I don't want trouble. "We're just subcontractors." Then pack it up. And to my surprise, they did. They didn't argue. They didn't bluster. They just left, took their pipes, their flags, and their machines, and rumbled back up the ridge. Karen's SUV was the last to pull away, her tires kicking up dust like she was trying to erase her footprints. But she'd left more than prints behind. That evening, my phone rang. It was Jenna. "They came for us next," she said. "Said our backyard fence violated height restrictions, and they fined us again for refusing access to shared utility easements, whatever that means." "They're escalating," I said. "They're scared," she replied. "The news called Channel 12. My sister's producer wants to do an interview with you." I exhaled slowly, letting that sink in. An hour later, I was sitting across from a young journalist named Chelsea in a booth at Miller's Diner. She had a notepad, a recorder, and eyes that missed nothing. I gave her everything: photos, the retention basin, the drainage pipe, the fish, the permit file from the county records office. I told her about the contractors, the fines, the intimidation tactics. When I finished, she leaned back and shook her head. "Sounds like a lot more than a zoning dispute." "It's a land grab," I said, "dressed up in bylaws and newsletters." By the next morning, the story had gone live. It wasn't headline news, but it was front and center on their website. "Retired Ranger accuses HOA of illegal drainage and property invasion." There was a photo of me by the creek, arms folded, expression grim. By noon, the HOA inbox was flooded with emails. I knew that because Raymond accidentally copied the entire neighborhood on a reply asking people to refrain from engaging with media hysteria. Within an hour, someone forwarded it to me. I printed it and pinned it to my fridge. But this wasn't over. Not by a long shot, because the Bellamys weren't going to go quietly. No, people like that never do. They think they own the rules. They don't know what it means when the land decides to fight back. The rain came fast, and it came heavy. I'd been watching the forecast all week. The local weather folks said, "We'd be getting storms, your typical Appalachian spring thunder. Maybe a couple inches of rain, nothing serious." But Thursday night, when the clouds rolled over the ridge like a black tide, I knew this wasn't your average downpour. The wind came first loud, hot, restless. It howled down the hollow, rattling my porch swing, pushing hard against the windows. I saw the trees sway like old dancers, trying to keep their balance. Then came the lightning, sharp and frequent, splitting the night like a camera flash over and over again. The thunder didn't roll, it cracked, like the sky was tearing open. And then the rain came. It didn't fall. It slammed. Sheets of it poured from the sky, thick and furious, hammering the tin roof so hard. I couldn't hear myself think. Within 15 minutes, the ground around my cabin turned to sludge. The creek, which had been low for days, started to rise. Inch by inch. Fast. Angry. I didn't sleep. I wrapped a blanket around my shoulders and sat on the porch with my flashlight and thermos, watching the water swell. Clear Fork Run turned from a friendly trickle into a roaring ribbon of brown fury. It surged past its banks, ripping loose limbs, washing over stones. Frogs, birds, and whatever else lived close to the waterline had already fled. By 2 a.m., the creek had doubled in width. Then, around 3 a.m., I heard sirens. At first, I thought they were far off, but they got louder, sharper, closer. I stood and looked out across the hollow toward the ridge. That's when I saw it. Water not from my creek, but from above. From the hill where the Bellamys and their HOA friends had built their pristine little empire. It was rolling down the slope, in sheets, sliding over lawns, and pouring off driveways. Their stone retaining walls, so carefully laid, so expensively mortared, had turned into useless gray curbs. The runoff was too much, way too much. The drainage system Raymond had rerouted and buried illegally was backing up. The basin he'd used to poison the water? Overflowing. I could picture it in my head, spilling over like a clogged sink, choking on its own deception. Nature was reclaiming what they tried to control. Within minutes, backyards turned into ponds. Driveways vanished. The entire lower cul-de-sac on the ridge became a swirling lagoon. Water burst through French drains, filled crawl spaces, flooded garages. Basement lights flickered out as breakers blew. One house, a two-story with white vinyl siding and black shutters, had water pouring in through the back door like a broken dam. I stood there in the dark and filmed every second. My hands didn't shake. My voice didn't tremble. This wasn't vengeance. It was truth. By 3:30 a.m., emergency services had arrived. Fire trucks, a couple of sheriff's deputies, flashing lights bouncing off the floodwater. I recognized Deputy Briggs from the station. Decent man, used to fish my side of the creek. He saw me standing near the road and came over, rain dripping from his hat. "You okay, Walter?" he asked. "I'm fine," I said. "Can't say the same for up the hill." He followed my gaze. Basement collapses. 2 power boxes fried. One woman had to be pulled off her porch swing when it floated. "That swing cost her $600, I said. "Custom ironwork." He smirked, then sobered. "This is gonna be bad. County's already on the way, and the utility company's talking lawsuits." I nodded. "You might want to check that retention basin up behind the Bellamy house. And that black pipe coming down from it." He squinted at me. "What's up there?" "Proof." He looked at me a long second, then back toward the ridge. "You didn't cause this, did you?" "No," I said. "But I sure as hell warned them." He walked away without saying another word. By sunrise, the storm had passed, but the damage was done. Half the fancy houses up the ridge were uninhabitable. Mudslides tore through 2 backyards. One car had been carried 300 feet and lodged itself sideways into a mailbox. There were photos all over social media, drones, phones, even local news vans. Channel 12 ran a headline before noon: "Luxury homes in Covenant community devastated by flash flood, faulty drainage system blamed." I sipped hot coffee on my porch and watched as the Bellamy's front lawn turned into a swamp. Their perfectly trimmed hedges floated in puddles. The decorative lanterns that lined their walkway bobbed like forgotten toys. Later that day, I saw Trudy outside, ankle deep in water, yelling at someone on her phone. Her heels were sinking into the mud. Her SUV, half submerged, blinked its emergency lights like it was pleading for help. Raymond stood beside her, soaked to the bone, staring blankly at the mess. I raised my coffee mug in their direction. They didn't look my way. Didn't need to. They knew. By the following morning, the whole hollow was buzzing. You can't hide flood damage in a place like Sycamore Hollow. Folks might keep quiet about politics or whose dog dug up whose hydrangeas, but a hill sliding into someone's garage, that gets people talking, loudly and fast. The roads were muddy but buzzing with activity pickup trucks, news vans, a couple of county inspection vehicles with blinking amber lights. You could see groups of people gathering at driveways, pointing up the ridge, waving their arms. By 9 a.m., it was obvious the narrative was shifting. No more whispers. No more "let's wait and see." Folks were connecting the dots. This wasn't just bad weather. This was man-made, manufactured by arrogance, denial, and one hell of a bad drainage plan. Channel 12 came back with a full camera crew. Chelsea, the reporter who had interviewed me days before, was in rubber boots and a windbreaker, now interviewing residents while they hauled furniture out of swampy basements. A man in his 50s, soaked to the knees, held up what was left of his HVAC unit and said, "It ripped clean off the wall, like tissue paper. Whole basements underwater." A woman with streaked mascara and a shaking chihuahua pointed toward the Bellamy's house and said, "They told us everything was up to code. They told us we were safe." But it was the drone footage that really blew the lid off. Some kid, probably 16, lives at the far west end of the hollow, sent up his drone at dawn. The video made its rounds on neighborhood group chats and hit Facebook before breakfast. It showed everything: the Bellamy's backyard, the retention basin, the pipe clear as day discharging straight into the natural slope. You could see the line of muddy water trailing all the way down the hill like a smoking gun. Within hours, it was being shared across the county. Then the state. By noon, even a regional environmental watchdog group had retweeted it with the caption, "When profit comes before planning, this is what happens." You couldn't spin it anymore. And Raymond? He tried. An HOA-wide email hit inboxes around 11 a.m., filled with soft language like extreme weather event and unforeseen infrastructure strain. He called the pipe a legacy drainage asset and said they were committed to working with municipal partners to assess the situation. People weren't buying it. For the first time, I saw actual unity in the hollow. Not the forced kind the HOA bragged about in its glossy brochures, but the real kind, the kind that comes when people realize they've been played. I was sipping coffee on the porch when Jenna pulled up in her minivan. They called an emergency HOA meeting, she said, getting out. Today, 4 o'clock, community center. I raised an eyebrow. Let me guess. They asked for volunteers to help with cleanup, but didn't invite questions? She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. They invited you. I laughed. Loud. Of course they did. By 3:45, the parking lot was full. I hadn't seen it that crowded since the 4th of July picnic back in 2015, the one where old Mr. Henley's barbecue grill caught fire and 3 people tried to put it out with lemonade. This time, nobody brought potato salad. People brought notebooks, phone cameras, and some serious side eyes. The Bellamys were already at the front when I walked in. Trudy was in a pale blouse that looked like it had just come off the ironing board. Raymond had swapped his usual loafers for rubber boots, PR optics, no doubt. He wore his concerned but in control face, the one I'd seen him use on everyone from contractors to neighbors. He looked surprised when I entered. I didn't sit in the back this time. I walked straight to the front, nodded to a few familiar faces, and leaned against the wall near the podium like I belonged there. Raymond cleared his throat and opened with the usual, "We understand this has been a difficult time for everyone." People shifted in their seats. "And we are working closely with the county to assess the extent of the damage." One woman raised her hand. "Did the county approve the drainage system behind your house?" Raymond hesitated. "The original grading plan was from 2018. I cut in, filed under your name, and it explicitly stated no runoff was to discharge onto private property." A few heads turned. Phones went up. Trudy jumped in. "Mr. Granger, this isn't the time for accusations." "No?" I asked. "When would be the right time after more houses flood? After someone's kid gets hurt in a contaminated yard?" Murmurs. Agreement. This wasn't going how they'd planned. Jenna stood up in the back. "My son's treehouse flooded because of you." He watched his handmade swing float away. Someone else added, "Our garden's ruined. We can't eat from it now. We don't know what's in that soil." Then another voice. "Why did you fine us for unapproved mailboxes while you rerouted an entire drainage system without permission?" Raymond raised his hands. "Let's keep this civil." "No," Ernie said, standing slowly from the back. "You don't get to hide behind civility when you've been lying through your teeth." Ernie never raises his voice, but that night he did. The room erupted. Not into chaos, but into testimony. One by one, people stood up and told their stories. About fines, about threats, about the subtle bullying they'd endured under the guise of community improvement. It wasn't just about the flood anymore. It was about everything. When it finally quieted down, someone called for a vote. Motion to remove Raymond and Trudy Bellamy from the HOA board, the woman near the front said. Effective immediately. It wasn't even close. The vote passed with only 2 abstentions, and both of them were sitting at the front. As they collected their things and walked out, Trudy's eyes caught mine. There was no fire in them now, just something brittle, something cracked. She looked like a porcelain figure that had just realized it wasn't bulletproof after all. Raymond didn't look at anyone. Outside, the air was heavy with post-storm humidity and something else. Relief. The kind that comes when people finally see the truth and speak it out loud. Jenna walked up and hugged me. "You did it," she said. "No," I replied. "We did." The weeks that followed felt like the air after a storm still thick with humidity, but clearer somehow. honest. The kind of air you can finally breathe without tasting tension. People looked each other in the eye again. Neighbors who used to wave from across driveways with polite, distracted smiles were now stopping to really talk, about the storm, about the board, about how close we came to letting control dress up as community and walk through our front doors. The cleanup was hard. We lost trees, flower beds, sheds, and memories. The ground stayed soft for weeks, soggy under boots and heavy with the scent of wet earth. But something else had shifted too. For the first time in years, folks weren't working alone. I saw 20-year-olds hauling broken patio furniture for 80-year-olds. Retired veterans patching fences for young couples. Potlucks popped up on porches again, not organized by the HOA but by people who just wanted to feed their neighbors. The Bellamy's house went up for sale 10 days after the vote. A real estate sign appeared on the pristine front lawn like a white flag. Word around town was they were relocating to Florida. Somewhere with less rain, Raymond reportedly told the realtor. Trudy didn't say much, not publicly. She stopped showing up at community functions, pulled out of the church decorating committee, and deactivated the neighborhood email list she once used to send weekly reminders. When the moving trucks finally came, no one gathered to say goodbye. Just the delivery men waved, more out of habit than sentiment. Their mansion sat on the ridge for 2 months before anyone made an offer. Mold had crept into the basement walls, and the back patio needed to be gutted. The new buyers? A retired schoolteacher and his husband, both quiet, both kind. They came to the next HOA meeting with cookies, not a clipboard. The HOA board, now under new leadership, held its first official forum at the community center. This time, the chairs were in a circle. No podium, no PowerPoint, no clipboards, just people face to face. I went not because I had to, but because I wanted to. When they asked if I'd speak, I didn't hesitate. I told them about the creek. I told them how it carried more than just water, it carried memories, grief, healing, and history. That tiny thread of mountain-fed flow had been with me through the worst days of my life and reminded me, every single morning, that movement is survival. That even when the world closes in, even when people try to bury what you love, life has a way of pushing forward. It bends, I said, but it doesn't break. It finds a way around the things that try to block it. And in doing that, it shapes everything in its path. There was silence after that. A good kind. I wasn't the only one with something to say. Miss Lila stood up and spoke about her garden, how she'd lost 3 seasons worth of soil but gained something better. Neighbors who knew her name again. Jenna shared how Caleb's treehouse had been rebuilt, stronger this time, with a pulley system and solar lights. She said he didn't cry anymore when he looked at the backyard. Ernie, in his usual dry way, joked that he was just grateful nobody tried to regulate the height of his dog. We laughed, but we also listened. A young couple from the edge of the hollow said they'd only lived there a year and had almost packed up after the storm, convinced they'd made a mistake. But then, the woman said, voice trembling, people started showing up. With tools, with food, with kindness. That was the moment it became clear the HOA hadn't failed because the rules were bad. It failed because the people writing them had forgotten what they were for. They used rules like weapons, not like tools. They thought unity meant uniformity. They mistook control for leadership. That's not what communities are made of. Communities are made on front porches, over shared tools, through late-night talks and early morning favors. They're built when someone knocks on your door not to hand you a violation, but to ask how you're holding up. We didn't vote to dissolve the HOA. We just rewrote it. From the ground up. This time it protected the land, not the lawn. This time it had room for tree houses and wind chimes and creeks that had been there longer than any of us. One Saturday, a group of us walked the length of Clear Fork Run. We planted native grasses, fixed the stone banks, and added signs that read Protected Natural Waterway, Community Stewardship in Progress. Caleb carried one of the signs on his back, like a flag. We let him pick where it went. Later that evening, back at my cabin, I poured myself a glass of iced tea and sat on the porch as the light faded. The water glittered in the late sun, tumbling over rocks that had sat in the same place for longer than any house up the ridge. A heron landed at the bend, tall and quiet, then stalked the shallows with the kind of grace no one teaches. I took a deep breath and let it out slow. We'd weathered the storm. Not just the rain, not just the flood, but the storm that came when people forget how to be neighbors. And like the creek, we'd found a way through. If this story meant something to you, maybe it's because, like me, you've seen how easily power can slip into the wrong hands. You've lived long enough to know that sometimes the danger doesn't wear a mask. It wears a smile, holds a clipboard, and calls itself community. But real community isn't about rules or manicured lawns. It's about looking out for one another, even when it's inconvenient. Especially when it's inconvenient. What happened in Sycamore Hollow could happen anywhere. Maybe it already has, in some way. Maybe someone tried to take what made your life feel like home and turn it into something they could control. Maybe you felt outnumbered, unheard, or just plain tired of fighting. But here's the thing, you're not alone, and it's never too late to stand up. Whether you're 60 or 90, your voice still matters. Your wisdom still matters. The world still needs people who remember what real neighborliness feels like. This story wasn't just about a creek. It was about dignity, about roots both in the ground and in the soul, and about finding strength not in shouting the loudest, but in standing the longest. If this message spoke to you, I hope you'll like, share, and subscribe. Not just because it helps the channel, but because somewhere out there, someone else needs to hear this. Maybe it's your neighbor. Maybe it's your granddaughter. Maybe it's you. Let's keep stories like this alive because sometimes a story is more than a story. Sometimes it's a reminder of who we are and who we still have the power to be.